humans, and welcome to Alien Robot Tiger, a podcast about you.
Imagine you, instilled with the dangerous elegance of a tiger, prowling through the dark. The human crowd parts before you like the understory of the jungle. You catch her scent, and she catches yours. The hunt is just beginning, but you both know how it will end. Crimson Roll, scent of power and confidence, available now. Visit tigermusk.com to order your bottle or find a retailer near you. Crimson Roll, because you deserve to roll.
Hello, humans. On today's episode of ART, we are going to discuss the topic of human civilization. Join me are Tiger and Robot. So I will simply throw out the question for you two to discuss. What is human civilization?
Imagine a group of termites building a giant mound, and then nearby there's another bunch of termites building another mound, and then the termites wander away from their mounds and discover another mound nearby, and then start arguing about whose mound is better until one termite mound either collapses and the previous termites expand into their territory, or a group of termites invades the other group and wipes them out and makes them, the survivors, conform to their culture. That's a short history of human civilization, I would say.
I like this allegory. To maybe simplify, I do think civilization is a term used when one group regards itself to be the superior culture and regards other cultures surrounding them as barbarous.
And I think, Tiger, there you nail a point that I've been making for a while, which is the way I use the word civilization and the way how civilization was commonly used by humans were different. Because, as you said, the common way was sort of to distinguish a very advanced and sort of powerful engine of a collective of humans that was, in some ways, doing better than all of the people around it in some cultural, technological, economic, spiritual way, perhaps. Whereas the way I use the word civilization is sort of to describe it as a collective body of peoples that form a new body that has a life of its own. The way I think about it is, let's say we were to talk about the Indian subcontinent and the civilization of the Indian subcontinent. What that is you have all these subcultures in there, the different ethnicities, the different cultures, the different religions. They form different organs. And these organs merge.
So then how do you define
civilization?
Like if you look at a body, so if you look at an alien body, you have a skin surface that defines, at least as far as I understand alien physiology. I don't know if parts of you extend out in other frequencies or dimensions or whatever beyond your meat suit. But,
very much so.
Oh, okay. Well, let me switch over to, well, even, I don't know if humans or other beings are that way, because the way science defines it is there's the meat suit, and then there's accidentally some consciousness stuff that seems to be, pretend to be affixed to it. And then there's this hard boundary where it goes, this is being, this is the edges of that being. Anything beyond that is not that being. So I think I might have, in some ways, answered my question in that perplexing way most of these questions seem to go of, how do you find the edge of a civilization? And I don't know if you do, based on that. Like, Tiger, how would you define the extent of your being?
I think it's context dependent in that it might be my territory, it might be the area that I am immediately in contact with and can interact with. It might be the surface of my skin. It might be the surface of my sense organs.
Or the mental dimension, which I think is a fascinating place that humans don't tend to go, even when they're talking about spiritual things of astral planes and other dimensions. If you look at any thinking being, then there's this vast realm of thought that you only get little tiny glimpses of access to as they make verbal or physical utterances that otherwise is unreachable.
That is, yeah, I agree completely. And that is what I was alluding to with the surface of my sense organs being both physical and non-physical ways of interpreting the world.
I think a good way to think about this is if you take a human and, say I just grab an average human from the street, you can see where their meat suit ends and their non-meat suit stuff begins pretty obviously. Yet if I take that human and I stick it in an isolation pod where there's no light, no sound, no sensation whatsoever, and I leave them there for a week and I have like a IV drip so they don't starve to death.
Is this hypothetical?
Moving on with the example, if I then take the human out of the isolation pod, that human is basically gone. They will have completely lost their mind. They won't be able to get it back. They will be a husk of themselves. It will basically just be a meat suit just lying around that has some basic cognitive functions. And all that made that human, what was that human, according to other humans, would have basically been lost by sticking it in the isolation chamber. Nothing ever happened to the meat suit in the boundaries regarding that. It was all the things outside of the human that the human has to interact with that were taken away that destroyed that human. Hypothetically.
So in your definition of a civilization, how is that distinct from a culture?
Culture is a part of a civilization. If you think of it as sort of like emergent layers, the civilization comes above the culture. You also include the materiality that civilization has created over time, or those groups of people have created over time. So the culture is like the mimetic greater whole, the greater context in which those people live. And then you have the economics, the sort of way they treat materials around, the technologies, the ways how they do things like their architecture, their tools for interacting with and manipulating the world and interacting with each other. When you fuse the culture and the physical tools and technologies together, that's what generates the civilization.
So then if you have something like, say, Islamic cultures or Christian cultures, how do you separate the civilization? So if you have, say, Persia and some sub-Saharan tribesmen wandering the desert, both ascribe to the Islamic faith, let's say, and yet are those separate civilizations that share, like the Venn diagram of cultures overlaps and they're different civilizations? Or is that one larger civilization? Or
like all things sort of linguistic, you can parse it in an infinite number of ways. And of course, the way I use the word is perhaps different from how most humans do. So the way I would say is that Arabic civilization and Persian civilization, as you can tell how I'm using this word, are actually distinct. But then both of those are Islamic in culture. Now, there's a third dimension, I think, to civilization that is important, which is also continuity of whatever that thing is. Because what's different between, say, the Arabic culture civilization and the Persian culture civilization is that they have very different origins, and they have, if you go back through history, they have different beginnings. They go back in time different amounts as well. So the Arabic civilization sort of more became prominent around 600, 700 AD, whereas Persian civilization, you can trace that back thousands of years to even before I arrived here on Earth. So they have a very different history to them as well. They have different origins, even though they overlap.
So a civilization in your usage is like a lineage of cultures.
Correct. There's a common through line of this collection of cultures and technologies. You can look at them and see that they're very different.
Yes, if a culture is by alien technology instantly transported, say, to give a science fiction analogy, the Stargate sort of, this culture from this time is put on a different planet. Does that make it a new civilization, or does that make it a branch of civilization as distinct and as indistinct as, say, moving over a mountain range?
I feel like, yes, that does make it a distinct civilization.
I think it would depend on how there remains between the two. So if you have a civilization that creates a colony somewhere and it remains traveling to that colony, it's essentially the same civilization. But if there's a break in contact, either intentional or accidental, abandoned, ships can't get through, whatever the blockage is, then the weather patterns change, whatever, then it might become a new civilization. But I think as long as there's some sort of communicative aspect that requires like maintenance and like updates, it'd be like a computer network of, if you create a new computer network, my computer network might not be able to communicate with yours. If it happens to start with the same code base, we could, but if we're separate teams doing different updates, we might reach a point where at some point we can't communicate anymore.
So with this, at what point has or will North American English civilization, British Isles English civilization, and Australian English civilization speciate, if you will? Civilizationate? Civilizationate.
When will they, or when did they?
At what point in time, past, present, or future, do you think they have, will, or might? Is there a marker? Can we point to, like, this is... Because they never lost contact entirely, but they have grown distinct in numerous ways.
I would think the marker is actually a labeling. When the majority of people in North America started calling themselves Americans instead of British, or when the Australians said, we're Australians, not British, then that would probably be at least one marker to go, oh, this is a different thing now, because the people in it think it's a different thing. Even from the outside, at that point, the cultures could have been to someone from China visiting, and if they visited England and Australia, they might not have been able to tell the difference. But for the people in that society, they're like, oh, I like your British accent. It's not British, it's Australian, mate. Right? So that seems to be the point where you could at least draw some type of line in some very shifting sand.
I feel like that's almost and this is, we could probably call this episode sort of arbitrary distinctions that humans make towards each other, where I feel like when...
That's kind of the podcast, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. Language reveals and conceals. So when Australia broke off from the UK, I wouldn't say that it became a separate civilization. It became a separate nation at that time. And what a nation is something we'll discuss later in the episode. But I wouldn't say that it became its own civilization yet. And to your point about when does a civilization become distinct, the thing with civilization is that there's usually... civilizations are isolated enough from each other that they can be seen very distinctly. So say you have the Roman civilization that existed at the time, and then you have the Chinese civilization, but because there was so little contact between the two, they were pretty distinct entities from each other.
But there was contact between
There
the
was
two.
contact. The difficulty, I think, also comes with modern humans, where you have the modern networked, globalized world, and all humans think of humanity itself as a civilization. But that is only come about as a result of the technological advances, which has allowed all cultures, nations, and peoples to connect and communicate with each other, therefore create a global macro civilization.
What you could also say is technological, yes, but political, because if the US hadn't decided that globalization was in their best interest to fight the Soviets, we might still have an internet at this point, but not globalization. If the US had decided there was another better way of combating the Soviet Union, then globalization might not exist.
Correct. I think the globalization, sort of as I discussed in the education episode, is still kind of a distinct thing from all the things underneath it. And the global civilization we have now is sort of a expansion of what was the American civilization, spread very thin and projected across the rest of the world.
So maybe we can use like external markers to try and figure out civilization stuff. So if you're a member of the global civilization, you probably have some form of smartphone. You're probably wearing shirt and pants, roughly created probably by an American corporation somewhere in the world. You probably have an email address and trade at some degree in dollars. And you were probably taught in a school that taught some flavor of math and language, and you hope to someday have enough money to have your own house and drive your own car.
And to retire once you reach a certain age point.
Right. So that you might say is global culture.
Yes, that's definitely one way you could say how humans have been sort of homogenized under a civilizational standard. Those are some good ways to show that standard. But back to what I said earlier, how America projected its civilization sort of across the world. Can you still say that America is a distinct civilization from English civilization? And in which way, how is English civilization different from European civilization? This gets to the second point of the episode, which is what is also a nation as well.
So to bring it back to my initial hypothesis of what we might mean by civilization, could it be that the members inside a civilization see the people outside of that civilization as, in some sense, illegitimate, backwards, inferior? Like, while there are certainly people in Western civilization who admire a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, there are few of them who would jump at the chance to adopt that full-time without, some qualifications and or at least some squeamishness about, oh, I have to do what with my waste and I have to butcher this myself and, all of those realities of life outside of the global hegemony.
Greetings, humans. This is Alien. Are you tired of your neighbor's pets wreaking havoc on your backyard? Do you dream of a peaceful night's sleep without the serenade of barking dogs or meowing cats or screeching gerbils? Well, fear not, for here at Alien Robot Tiger, we have the solution for you. With our brand new pet abduction service, you can bid farewell to your pesky neighbor's furry friends in a flash. Simply contact us with the GPS location, DNA, and biomarkers of your targeted animal. And with our automated state-of-the-art abduction drones, we will whisk away those fluffy troublemakers into an inaccessible phantom zone dimension where they can frolic and play to their heart's content.
Oh no, has anybody seen Fluffy? She has vanished into thin air. Hey, Mr. Jingles has gone missing. How will I live without him?
But wait, there's more. Act now, and we will throw in a complimentary mind wipe for your neighbor, for free, ensuring that they never suspect a thing.
Thanks, Alien. With my neighbor's Chihuahua gone, I can finally enjoy some peace and quiet.
So, what are you waiting for? Say goodbye to noisy pets and say hello to tranquility. With Alien's Pet Abduction Service, contact us now and let your path to peace begin. Terms and conditions may apply. As of now, only 13 species of pets are available for abduction targets. Alien Robot Tiger are not responsible for damages caused to any human children the abduction drones might mistake for pets.
So would you say that civilization almost has a negative categorization attached to the word, as in civilization is this, everything else that is not this is non-civilization?
It is barbarous for a traditional term.
Well, I think you could also have civilizations that, rather than look down, look up as well. So if you are in North Korea and you have DVDs smuggled in about what the global civilization is and you want to join it, I can't imagine most North Koreans, aside from those advantaged by it, look down on the rest of the world, and the Americans in particular. They probably go, man, I wish we could do that. And you can kind of tell countries that are like that because they have border walls and the guards' guns point in rather than out.
Yes, I wonder how much of that is a sense of they're civilized and we're in prison, we're backwards, we're whatever they don't want to be, that they see the civilization doing that they wish they had. But perhaps they consider themselves the civilization and those people over there as the superior civilization. I don't know.
So there's a degree of inequality built in, of there's some sort of value judgment that defines a civilization by this other civilization that might be better or worse, but is definitely not equal to.
Or at least not the same as. Like Marco Polo experiencing China for the first time probably regarded them as a important civilization. He was fascinated by the culture. He still went back to Italy eventually and was like, you guys got to hear about all this cool shit that I learned over there. I don't know if he saw it as superior or inferior or maybe some of both.
I feel like he almost would have seen it kind of more by the way I tend to look at it as more of just degrees of difference versus the way humans use it, which is more negative, positive value judgment. Which in that case, should we have two different words then? Should we have strong degree of difference be a distinct word and then keep civilization for negative, positive value judgment?
Well, I think you'd have to figure out what that other word is first.
Exactly.
And interestingly, too, you might have situations where when the Romans encountered the Greeks, they, to a vast degree, looked up at the Greeks, even though at the time Rome was militarily and financially way more powerful than Greece was. But they still looked up to and emulated and stole a ton of Greek culture to build into their civilization. Even when they went over and had the Macedonian Wars and proved that the maniple is a superior military technology to the phalanx over and over, much to the chagrin of the Greeks, and then they were folded into the Roman Empire, they still looked up to the Greeks, even though they'd folded them in. And even the Greeks, after they'd been conquered, they had to admit, like, yeah, now we're Roman subjects, but they still in many ways looked down on the kind of rough, uncouth, busybody Romans, even though they were conquered peoples.
Not a perfect one-to-one analogy, but some of the same happened in the last century with America and Europe. America adopted a lot of European philosophy, tradition, imported European scientists and thinkers because that's where America was, where the money was, but the traditions of education and the traditions of the things that Americans cared about were largely still based in Europe in 1900, 1910, and over the course of two world wars, that shifted dramatically.
In many ways, a lot of American things are still imported from Europe. The idea of environmentalism is to a large degree built out of Europe. Like the Germans, for example, are rabid environmentalists, even to the point where it may result in their country's downfall. And then, yet there's this backwash or turnaround where then American culture, sometimes not even the great parts of it, then bounce back out. For example, in much of Europe, abortion, whatever you think of it, was not a big deal. It was just, through most of Europe, it was accepted that abortion was just a woman's right. And then some part of the far right of the American political spectrum who believed that abortion is a sin and evil and whatever else, that went back. Suddenly there's all sorts of movements in Europe against abortion when there never was before.
While I don't have a specific example, I'm sure there's wash back and forth as any two cultures interact. I'm sure there were Greek dining areas that were set up as triclinium in the time of their Roman occupation, and as Persian and Islamic cultures mixed, as Greek and Persian cultures mixed, as Persian and North Indian cultures mixed. Those things go back and forth, even if one is culturally dominant or one is militarily or economically dominant. Humans like exchanging ideas.
So then the Greek civilization, when they were conquered by the Romans, they still retained a lot of their Greek identity. So were they a separate civilization just trapped within the borders of the Roman nation?
Well, it's
or
kind
a
of
subset?
It's kind of interesting because the Greek civilization almost won to a certain degree in that aspect, where even though physically they were conquered by the Romans, the Greek civilization and culture lived rent-free in the Romans' heads and influenced their ways and actions a lot. I mean, the Romans still had a lot of their own distinctiveness, but you could think of the act of the Romans conquering the Greeks was almost the victory for the Greek culture, that it had consumed the Roman culture so much that Roman culture consuming Greek culture was kind of almost more of a reunification, or it could be seen as a potential reunification. Now, we have the phrase Greco-Roman in modern times because what happened was when you took the two together, they created its own distinct culture and civilization that was different from the two different that came before. But still, I would say that Greco-Roman civilization is still primarily Greco, and Roman is perhaps more regulated to the political, legal system.
And then to keep tracing that civilization forward, you have the Constantinian turn, if you will, as the Christian tradition spreads from the hinterlands of Rome to a minority all over the Roman Empire, to eventually converting emperors and going back and forth in palaces for however long until it became the norm across Europe. Is that a merging of a Judeo-Christian civilization into the Greco-Roman civilization? And when does that diffuse into a different civilization as you get like Nordic Christianity?
I think you make a good point here about the whole problems with the definition of civilization that I'm trying to bring up, where it feels a little bit wrong to say Christian civilization then merged with Greco-Roman civilization, yet by the definitions we're perhaps using of civilization, you could say, yes, there is such a thing as a Christian civilization.
Well, I think Christian civilization is inherently, it's the child of a Greco-Roman civilization and a Judaic civilization, if you will.
I think maybe it is a culture. I wonder if a culture is like an organ that civilizations have.
Which was kind of the point I made earlier, where you had the culture and then you had the technologies, and the combination of the two kind of makes something that's a bit different than just the culture or just the technology.
Well, not just the technologies, you also have then the geographics and resources and economics and those things. Perhaps if you put all that together, the complete package is a civilization.
And the histories as well.
Yeah, histories, the mythologies. So maybe that's a civilization, and then culture and technology and markets and things are like organs. And you might have cultures that share similar organs, the way a human and an antelope have similar organs. You can go, look, there is the heart. But you look at an antelope and a human and you don't go, there's its fingers or there's its horns. And so they have cultural overlaps. They share similar organs, but there are organs that are distinct that the other one doesn't have.
And that's kind of similar to what I was saying earlier, how a civilization is a greater body that's emerging from the cultures, the markets, the geographies, the histories that are underneath it, even though it maybe doesn't have a skin suit like an organic mammal would. It's still a greater body that has rather common organs in it. I feel like going back to the definition of a civilization being the sort of positive negative value judgment, one way that civilization seems to be commonly used is whoever's on top right now. So an example of that would be Greco-Roman civilization was considered civilization because they were on top of everybody in the Mediterranean, the Middle East, parts of Europe. Yet there was clearly other stuff going on. It wasn't just Romans. The Romans had integrated a lot of stuff. Comparing that to modern humans, as of the time of making this recording, where you have sort of the Anglo-American civilization that has kind of dominated the world, has exported its culture and economic systems to the whole world. The reason why modern humans even use the term human civilization just happens to be because there is a very powerful entity that's just on top of everything right now. And say that entity was to wither away and fade and lose its control and influence, would we still refer to that as civilization when it's withdrawn? And would we have other civilizations pop up that they would then call civilizations?
I think for some period, certainly, we keep going back to Rome, but we can use China as well. There's inevitably a time when the dominant civilization in an area declines a bit, and some neighboring barbarian tribe that may identify in contrast with those people over there, oh, yeah, they call us barbarians, so what are we going to do? I guess we fuck them up. And they usually almost always, will adopt trappings of the civilization because the world they have known and their parents have known and their grandparents have known always looked with some mix of envy and hatred at the trappings of Imperial China or Imperial Rome.
So there's almost like a skit I've heard a comedian make. Some people are traveling to North America from Europe, and they go and say, well, we claim this for Portugal. And they go, well, we live here. And they're like, do you have a flag? And you're like, well, no. And like, well, it's ours because you don't have a flag. There's something about that tracing boundaries and being able to lay out on a map and draw lines around what is yours. And that seems to be, throughout history, that seems to be civilization. And then you have like the nomads, where if you're the Mongol horde, you don't have a map and you go, this is ours, because you're just on the move and there's just the great sea of grass and you're just wandering around on it until you bump into somewhere where they've drawn a line and they're like, this is ours. And you're like, well, stop us. And they're like, okay, wait, I guess we won't. And that seems to be one of the trends is civilized groups, and this goes back to economics. Whenever you have a dominant civilization, what tends to happen is their currency becomes the dominant currency that everyone wants to use. And that gives their currency more value than it should have. And so they can buy more with it than realistically the value of the metal or paper or whatever it is bits should merit. What that ends up doing is that civilization gets lazy, because with the amount of effort it takes for me as a, say, Persian, I can take my Persian money and I can go to a neighboring area and they're like, wow, this is Persian money. We'll give you 5 times what you would get back in Persia for it because we want this Persian money. And so then why should I buy this Persian stuff that costs 5 times, I get 5 times less for, or costs 5 times as much? So I don't pay this Persian merchant. And so they go out of business. And then eventually that rich civilization starts to undermine itself just through its sheer prosperity, because everybody wants their money. And then the culture gets lazy and weak and fat, and their industry starts to hollow out, whatever industry means at the time, their weaving or their pottery or whatever it is.
Always agriculture.
Yeah, right. So those things start to get weaker because you can go get it for cheaper elsewhere, because everyone wants your coin, your woven pieces of cloth paper or whatever. And so then what tends to happen is another group, through most of history, migrant and vagrant aren't quite the right terms, nomadic groups that don't have those boundaries, that actually are more connected to reality, and they live through strength and combat and whatever. They go to this group that's hollowed out. They come up and go, we want your stuff. They're like, we'll give you money. Like, we don't care about this money. And they hand them a gold coin. They're like, you can't eat it. But hey, I like that toga you're wearing. Give it to me. And they're like, well, no, you can't have it. They're like, well, do you have an army? Like, we do. Oh, no, now we don't. And then they go in and take over the trappings, but replace it with some bit of that realism we were talking about in education of, we know what to do and don't care about your what to think. And they're like, well, we think you shouldn't be doing this. I'm like, well, we know how to do things, so we're going to come and do stuff to you. I don't care what you think.
And quite frequently, there ends up being some melding of those, because the people who are good at maps do have some advantages in running a large nation. Mm-hmm. When the Mongols invaded China, they couldn't run China on Mongol techniques alone. They adopted a lot of Confucian scholars to continue running China in a way that benefited the new Mongol heads.
Introducing Peternatural. Is your pet's existential experience lacking depth? Upgrade their worldview with Peternatural, the premium philosophical enhancement for your furry friends. Pause and ponder. Watch as your pet contemplates the meaning of life with our exclusive guided meditations tailored for dogs, cats, and even hamsters. Pet-friendly philosophy. From Sartre for Schnauzers to Nietzsche for Newfoundlands, Peternatural delivers a curated selection of philosophical classics adapted for your pet's intellectual palate, except reptiles because they have no souls. Enlightenment in every bowl. Infused with cosmic wisdom, our specially formulated pet food guarantees a daily dose of existential enlightenment. Nourish their intellects along with their distasteful meat suits. Pet Ponder Playdates. Connect with other Peternatural enthusiasts at our monthly meetups. Share your pet's latest philosophical musings and discuss the inherent meaning behind chasing their own tails. With Peternatural, your pets will be the most equal of all the animals. Terms and conditions apply. By purchasing Preternatural, you acknowledge that your pet may develop a sophisticated taste for literature and may start calling you on your logical fallacies. Preternatural is not responsible for any pet-induced existential crises or attempts to establish a utopian society of enlightened animals.
I think this also brings up another interesting way to sort of describe what a civilization is, and that a civilization is a very formalized system. So within, say, the Persian Empire, part of the reason why their gold is so valuable is because there's a formalized system, which is like, this gold has a particular value at a particular time and place, versus like, say, bartering. It's very situational, it's informal. It's more like, well, I got a chicken, you got your can of worms. How do we go about trading this stuff? So civilizations are groups of peoples, cultures, and I say groups because you can have multiple cultures, multiple nations within a civilization, but a civilization is a greater collective of humans that are just very formalized in the way they do things, in the way they plan, and the way they even conceptualize and break up the world. Whereas the non-civilizational is the more informalized system, generally, but not always, kind of the more nomadics, like you said. That's just one example. And then, as you said, over time, part of the reason why those civilizations become undone is because they become too formalized to the point where they go down their own rabbit holes of their own maps, being confused for the territory, and they're like, oh, well, I hold this proposition in my head that you won't stab me with that sword because X, Y, Z legal reasons on this constitution I wrote, or someone wrote hundreds of years ago. And then the person gets stabbed in the stomach and they're like, oh no, my propositions, they didn't protect me. You have some kind of collapse like that occurring where it's so over-formalized that a non-formal system now has an advantage over the formalized system.
Or in ones that come apart on their own, usually due to agricultural collapse, is in some ways how market bubbles happen. So if you have a market bubble, one of which is, perhaps several of which are happening now, is originally in a stock market, you buy shares of a company because you think it's going to deliver profits in the future. And so you're buying a share of future profits. And as people buy that, then at some point if the system becomes large and complex enough and some people are making enough money, some people go, well, I don't want or know how to do the work to figure out how do you do future earnings stuff, and I don't know how to evaluate a company, so I'm going to do what you do. Or I'm just going to buy the thing that everybody seems to be buying because someone probably did enough research. And eventually that becomes valuable not because of what it will provide, becomes valuable because everyone else is buying it. And then when everyone buys it, its value goes up. And so it actually legitimately gains more value, but it's ephemeral value, even more than future earnings. Like, we're predicting the future, which is already pretty nebulous and questionable. But if you're not going based even on, we make these things that currently sell for this, you're going, I'm going to buy this thing because everyone else bought it, and then it goes up in value, and then more people buy it, and people keep on buying it to the point where, at current times, buying a company because of fundamentals, like we produce this amount of profit or whatever, is much less important than buying the thing that everyone else is buying. And in some ways, I think a civilization near the point of its collapse stops buying into its story because it's a good story. They start buying into the story because they think everyone else is buying into the story.
And because it is valuable because everyone has bought into the story.
Right. And so if you are, say, you're a Mayan emperor and you believe that the crops have been great because you're a great emperor, and the crops continue to be great, then a bunch of the farmers will stop growing crops and they'll come to the capital to do more prayers. And because that keeps on working to some degree, at some point, it keeps on building up and more people come and pray to the emperor because the crops start staying good. And then there's a bad year and the harvest fails. And suddenly everybody who was coming to the temple and getting all the food from the countryside, because they keep on feeding all the people that come and pray to the emperor because that's what's making the crops grow. Then you have a bad crop and suddenly your prayers don't matter. What matters is whether you can eat or not. And I think as many cultures have failed due to thought bubbles popping as have due to their thought bubbles being weak and someone coming over and popping it.
I would say that a crop failure is someone coming over and popping it, even if it's not a human band of nomads or the empire to civilizations over, or whoever happens to be expanding into your territory, the winds can fuck you up as well.
So I'm curious, Alien, how would you define your genre's civilization, either by, where we did it as a combination of like memes, when you're talking about education, the memes and skills and motivations they pass down, which could be another way of defining a civilization of what their education teaches, or by external things they all carry around or strive for. So what would you say a short version of alien civilization would look like?
Part of the reason why I brought up this discussion of human civilization was because it's very difficult for me to find any analogs within my genre to necessarily compare it to that.
I heard the explanation recently of perhaps the reason why humans and alien races don't communicate well is, what if one alien race communicated through pipe exhaust? And humans might not ever know the difference. And even though there might be volumes of information being imparted, or perhaps through particle formation that form clouds or lightning patterns or the earthquake frequency, and there's all sorts of messages there that they're just not equipped or looking for. Tiger, would say that tigers have a civilization?
I would maybe go so far as to say the material reality and the material culture of cats in general, and big cats particular, changes much less than our culture does. So I would say, while there is biome-specific things that we eat, we're always functioning in a similar role of predator, and there isn't too much question of how to grow rice versus how to grow wheat. If squash is good in this climate, if there are animals around to eat, we eat them. So the culture difference, I think, matters more than the technological, environmental, civilizational differences, but there probably is some distinction.
One thing I think that I have perhaps neglected when it comes to cultural mimetic aspects of humanity is, how does the geography affect those? Because I pay a lot of attention to geography when it comes to material needs, such as the food you can get, the minerals you can make, whether or not you can protect your boundaries from other competitors. But the role that geography plays on the mimetic and on the mental realm, not just geography, but the environment in general, is something that I should pay more attention to when it comes to these higher order aspects, such as culture and civilization. All right, well, I think that's a wrap for today's episode. Any final thoughts, Tiger or Robot?
It's not a complete idea, but I think the more different civilizations you can grow to respect, both historically and presently around the world, the better you are as a person. And at least the better you are equipped to handle whatever history throws at you.
Study civilizations, because then you're studying history, and there's a degree of geographic and demographic predestination that exists, and history will give you many examples of that to help you predict the current future and hopefully make less mistakes because of it.
So with that, I will say adieu.
Arrivederci.
You have been listening to Alien Robot Tiger. If you enjoy this, consider subscribing to our Patreon for bonus content and access to our own private Discord.